trade boost as Moscow builds a new shipping line linking the two countries. Now, the new route will connect Novorossiysk, and this is a strategic port on the Black Sea in Lagos, and this will be to Lagos in Nigeria, and the service is expected to launch in mid-June. Future expansion plans may also reach Senegal. Russian officials say that the shipping line will enable exports of agricultural goods, machinery and transport equipment to Nigeria. In return, it will allow Russia to purchase cotton from a fellow West African state, Mali, regional staple with an annual output of over 650,000 tons.
For centuries, the rhythm of world trade was written far from Africa's shores. Ships left European harbors, crossed the oceans, and returned carrying Africa's raw wealth, gold, oil, copper, coffee, while the continent waited for finished goods to come back the other way. But today a new story is unfolding along the coasts of Africa. From Lamu in Kenya to Lekki in Nigeria, from Djibouti to Port Said, cranes rise against the sunrise, steel tracks push inland, and a new generation of workers stand where their ancestors once watched foreign ships take everything away. This time the ships belong to Africa. What if the map of global commerce were being redrawn, not in Europe or Asia, but right here in African waters? Under the African Continental Free Trade Area, 55 nations are linking ports, railways, and digital customs systems into one of the largest trade networks on Earth. Economists call it integration. Historians will call it independence through connection. And as container vessels depart carrying goods made in Africa, not extracted from it, the sound of engines on the horizon becomes the heartbeat of a rising power. In Kenya's coastal heat, the deep-water port of Lamu stands as a symbol of what is coming. Built to anchor the Lapset corridor that connects Kenya, Ethiopia, and South Sudan, it allows a shipment from Addis Ababa to reach Asian markets weeks faster than before. A decade ago, the idea sounded like fiction. Today, the cranes are real, the docks alive, the containers stacked higher each week. From East Africa to the Gulf of Guinea, new harbors are being born. Lekki in Nigeria, Tema in Ghana, Bagamoyo in Tanzania, each designed not for extraction but for ownership. In the old order, the world built ports to take from Africa. In the new order, Africa builds ports to trade with itself and with partners on its own terms. At Lekki, the largest ships ever to reach West Africa glide into a basin engineered by African hands. Each container that lifts off the dock carries a message to the world. This is not business as usual. Behind the steel and concrete lies coordination. The African Union's digital customs network now lets cargo clear across borders in hours instead of days. Truckers who once slept for weeks at checkpoints can cross nations in a single push. Freight trains snake across the savannah. Farmers load produce bound for export. Dashboards glow with live data from satellites and sensors. From Cairo to Cape Town, a new rhythm echoes. The rhythm of movement, ownership, and ambition. This transformation is not only about infrastructure, it is about intention. For the first time in modern history, the continent's arteries of commerce are being built to serve African markets first and the world second. Economists call it internalized growth, the moment a region stops waiting for opportunity and starts manufacturing it at scale. The ports no longer symbolize dependency. They are monuments to self-determination. Across the coastlines, young engineers speak of connection, not extraction. Entrepreneurs look inland instead of overseas. The narrative that once defined Africa as a supplier of raw material is fading into history, replaced by one that defines it as a producer, a connector, a decision-maker in the flow of global goods. The sun sets over Lamu. Cargo lights flicker to life. A ship's horn cuts through the twilight, long and low. The sea answers back. And somewhere between the rhythm of the waves and the clang of the cranes, you can hear it, the steady pulse of a continent awakening. Across the continent, the movement is no longer just visible, it's unstoppable. The African Continental Free Trade Area has opened the largest single market on Earth by population, connecting over 1 billion people through one trade agreement. At its core lies a simple truth. When Africans trade with each other, the world must adapt. The dream of continental unity that once lived only in speeches and ideals is now being built with steel, fiber optics, and determination. Every new highway, railway, and undersea internet cable tightens the weave of a new African network. The ports are the gateways, but the arteries reach far inland, to the factories of Lagos, the warehouses of Nairobi, the textile mills of Addis Ababa. On the shores of the Red Sea, Djibouti's deep-water port hums day and night, linking landlocked nations like Ethiopia to the global market. From here, goods move through the new Addis Djibouti Railway, cutting travel time from days to hours. It's not just speed, it's sovereignty. Every container that moves through African-managed systems weakens the hold of dependency that defined the past century. In South Africa, rail links are being restored to connect the heart of the continent with its southern harbors. In Egypt, the Suez Canal's twin expansion is coordinated with African trade corridors stretching toward the Nile Basin. And in Kenya, digital customs systems synchronize with satellite tracking to keep cargo visible from the moment it leaves a farm or factory until it reaches the buyer. This is the power of connection, a continent once divided by colonial borders now wiring itself together through trade, technology, and trust. The world watches, often in quiet disbelief. As global trade faces disruption elsewhere, wars, sanctions, and shipping bottlenecks, Africa is quietly creating reliability. And reliability, in trade, is power. For decades, global economics revolved around a handful of shipping routes: the Suez Canal, the Panama Canal, the Strait of Malacca. But new African routes, linking the Indian Ocean, the Atlantic, and the Mediterranean, are forcing analysts to redraw their maps. The Lamu, Mombasa, Djibouti axis connects East Africa to Asia faster than ever before. The Trans-Saharan corridors link West Africa to North Africa's ports. A new coastal highway stretches from Lagos to Dakar, binding 15 nations through trade instead of treaties. The heartbeat of this change is integration, logistics, not politics. The same digital platforms that let entrepreneurs move payments across borders are now allowing ships to move goods with unprecedented transparency. The African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat calls it digital sovereignty. Africa controlling not just what it trades, but how that trade is recorded, tracked, and taxed. In warehouses from Kigali to Accra, drones scan cargo in seconds. Startups build AI systems to predict supply chain bottlenecks. Where the old world once saw risk, Africa now sees opportunity. Every improvement in logistics adds billions to continental GDP, and more importantly, it rewrites perception. For centuries, others described Africa as remote, disconnected, unpredictable. But as its own trade corridors come alive, those words lose meaning. Africa's new identity is precision, timing, coordination, a new professionalism that tells the world the era of delay is over. China's Belt and Road Initiative, India's trade missions, and Gulf investments have accelerated this transformation. But make no mistake, the direction is set by Africa itself. The partnerships are strategic, not submissive. African governments are no longer signing contracts for extraction. They are negotiating stakes, shares, and ownership. Ports once leased for decades to foreign powers are being reclaimed through joint ventures. And while Western markets debate deglobalization, Africa is writing its own chapter, reglobalization on African terms. The numbers tell the story. In the past 5 years, intra-African trade has grown faster than trade with any other region. The new routes are shortening distances that once seemed eternal. A tomato from Nigeria reaches Ghana in 2 days instead of 2 weeks. Coffee from Ethiopia arrives in Dubai faster than it once reached Europe. Goods move because trust moves, and trust moves because systems now belong to those who use them. This is not merely economic evolution. It is psychological liberation. The act of trade, once dictated by outsiders, now belongs to the people whose labor and land sustain it. The ports, the railways, the digital platforms, they are more than infrastructure. They are statements of identity. Each shipment that leaves an African dock is a declaration. We are connected, we are capable, and we are in control. The power of connection is not loud. It hums beneath the surface, steady and unstoppable. And as the sun sets over the Atlantic and rises again over the Indian Ocean, that hum grows louder, blending with the voices of 1 billion people building their own destiny. As Africa's new shipping arteries expand, the global system begins to tremble. In boardrooms from Brussels to Washington, analysts scramble to explain the numbers flashing on their screens. Shipping costs are falling across African routes, but rising sharply through the old colonial channels. The reason? Efficiency born of sovereignty. For decades, Europe and the United States controlled the trade choke points. From the Suez to the Atlantic, they dictated pricing, insurance, and logistics. But today, the balance of power has quietly shifted south. When African ports control their own tariffs, when African banks handle trade settlements in their own currencies, Western leverage evaporates. This is not confrontation, it's correction. A century of unequal trade agreements, raw material dependence, and external shipping monopolies is being replaced by something unprecedented: African coordination. In Brussels, European Union economists warn of a structural shock. Industries once reliant on cheap African exports now face competition from African value-added goods. Copper and cobalt no longer leave the continent raw. They leave refined, assembled, and ready for market. Textile exports from East Africa undercut Asian prices. Tech components from North Africa challenge even European manufacturers. The shockwave spreads beyond trade. Insurance companies in London report steep losses as shipping routes bypass their firms. Logistics conglomerates in Europe and America find themselves locked out of contracts once guaranteed by influence. And for the first time, global media admits what African analysts have known for years, that the world's youngest, fastest-growing continent is no longer a supplier. It's a competitor. In Beijing, officials watch closely. China, once Africa's biggest creditor, now becomes an equal partner in logistics development. Joint ventures are reshaping the maritime map. African ports co-owned, African crews trained, African data protected. Beijing's calculation is simple. Cooperation now means influence later. In contrast, Washington hesitates. Old habits die hard. The U.S. sees Africa's rising independence as a threat to control rather than a chance for collaboration. But as new trade blocs form, BRICS Plus, the African Union's observer role at the G20, and the AfCFTA's emerging financial clearinghouse, Washington finds fewer allies to lean on. It is not isolation Africa seeks, but balance. For the first time in modern history, the continent can say no to one-sided deals and mean it. In the markets, currency traders whisper about a quiet revolution, the gradual shift from dollar-denominated trade to regional settlements in the African payment and settlement system. Oil contracts, once signed exclusively in dollars, now appear in a mix of yuan, naira, and shillings. It's not dominance, it's diversification. And that diversification reshapes confidence itself. The headlines in global newspapers can't hide their tone, surprise mixed with disbelief. Africa sets new maritime standards. European traders lose market share. A new trade power emerges in the global south. But for those on the ground, the truck driver crossing the new Dakar-Lagos highway, the engineers supervising the port cranes in Mombasa, the young coder optimizing trade data in Kigali, it's not a shock. It's a plan, decades in the making, finally materializing. And through it all, a new psychology spreads, the understanding that Africa's progress no longer needs permission. The world is adjusting to a simple, irreversible fact. Africa now holds leverage. The same leverage once used against it, control of resources, routes, and logistics, now rests in African hands. This leverage isn't loud or boastful. It doesn't announce itself with sanctions or summits. It manifests in quiet decisions: where to export, who to trade with, which ports to modernize, which currencies to accept. And as the West recalculates, as Asia repositions, Africa's confidence grows, not as a reaction, but as a realization. Because for the first time since the dawn of modern trade, the maps are being redrawn from the inside out. From Accra to Dar es Salaam, from Cairo to Cape Town, leaders no longer speak of dependence or aid. They speak of partnership, productivity, and purpose. It is a new rhythm, one that echoes through warehouses, ports, and air corridors alike. Africa is open, but on its own terms. And as shipping lanes realign, satellites trace new trade patterns that even algorithms struggle to predict. Every recalculation tells the same story. The center of gravity in global trade is shifting, one container at a time. As the world watches, Africa's blueprint for the future begins to unfold, not in speeches, but in steel, code, and collaboration. In Djibouti, The hum of cranes and cargo ships no longer signals foreign control, but continental confidence. In Lamu, engineers draw plans that stretch far beyond Kenya's borders, connecting new ports to inland trade routes that will one day feed an entire generation of African industries. In Nigeria, refineries that once stood idle roar back to life, exporting finished fuel to African nations first and to the world second. The symbolism is unmistakable. Africa is no longer waiting for trade to come to it. Africa is the trade. Across 55 nations, a new strategy is emerging, one that values connectivity as much as currency, technology as much as territory. The African Continental Free Trade Area isn't just paperwork, it's becoming infrastructure, identity, and intention. Every railway laid, every new fiber line connected, every container tracked digitally, they all form the veins of a new economic organism. For centuries, Africa was the world's supplier. Now, it is building the systems to be the world's supplier and the world's trader. And this time, it will not be priced from the outside. Western corporations, long accustomed to dictating terms, now face a marketplace that speaks with one unified voice. The old formula of extraction and exploitation no longer computes in a continent designing its own algorithms of trade. The numbers are staggering. Africa's shipping and logistics market is projected to exceed $1 trillion within the decade, powered by automation, local manufacturing, and strategic partnerships with BRICS nations. The Red Sea and Indian Ocean, once seen as peripheral corridors, now pulse with African-led shipping consortia rivaling global giants. In Addis Ababa, the African Union's Economic Commission finalizes the Continental Maritime Integration Strategy, a bold blueprint to synchronize all African ports under shared digital systems, cutting transaction costs by up to 40%. What used to take 15 days of customs clearance can now be done in 48 hours. Efficiency has become sovereignty, and that efficiency is beginning to terrify the old powers. Because every minute saved, every local shipment completed, every African-owned logistics hub opened, chips away at centuries of dependency. The illusion of control is gone. The West no longer dictates Africa's trade rhythm. Now, Africa moves to its own beat, fast, precise, unstoppable. But beneath the statistics lies something deeper, a philosophical shift. For decades, the world told Africa that its strength was in its soil, its gold, oil, cobalt, and diamonds. But the truth, long suppressed, is that Africa's real power was never underground. It was in its people, its innovation, its coordination, its unity. And now, that unity is rising. In the ports of Durban, cranes move like clockwork. In Egypt, the Suez Corridor extends deeper into African logistics networks. In Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, new shipyards are being constructed not to export raw goods, but to export African-built vessels. Even the language of trade is changing, no longer developing nations, but emerging powers. No longer aid recipients, but strategic partners. The future maps of global trade are already being drawn, and for the first time, the lines don't start in London, Paris, or Washington. They start in Lagos, Nairobi, Cairo, and Johannesburg. And at the center of it all is a quiet but powerful truth. Africa has stopped waiting for permission. Every new shipment through African-controlled ports, every partnership signed under fairer terms, every currency exchanged in local systems. These are not just transactions. They are declarations. Declarations that the age of dependency is over. Declarations that the world's youngest continent is no longer following history. It's writing it. The same oceans that once carried ships of exploitation now carry vessels of independence. The same trade routes once controlled by empires now flow with African purpose. And somewhere between the roar of engines and the hum of cranes, one message echoes across the seas. The oceans no longer divide Africa from the world. They connect Africa to its destiny. The maps have changed. The rules have changed. And for the first time in centuries, Africa decides how the world moves.